Kia ora everyone and welcome to Valheim. Today I'm going to give you an early access look and review at the game. So, for starters, what is Valheim? So Valheim came out just a few days ago at time of recording, and it is an open world survival game set in a Viking fantasy setting. Okay, and that's really important. It is a fantasy setting. There's a fantasy element to this game. It's heavily based around crafting, so you will be doing a lot of crafting. Base building as well. There's some reasonable base building mechanics in the game, which I'll cover a little bit later. And combat too. You're going to be doing a bit of fighting. Now, the game itself is still in early access, and I want to reiterate that again and just make that really clear that this review is more of a preview because the developers are still adding a lot to this game. It's only really just hit Steam, and I have to say, I think it's going to blow up. Okay? My too long didn't read before I get into the detail is this is a fantastic open world survival crafting game that, despite being in early access, performs incredibly well. It easily allows multiplayer or single player, right? Anywhere from 1 through 10 players. Now, I can't speak to the performance at 10 players, but between sort of 1 to 5 players, in my experience, from what I've seen and played, this game performs really well. So that's my too long didn't read. In summary, it's a great game. Now, let's dive into the specifics for this early access title. I'm going to talk a bit about its price, about its performance, and then about the gameplay and some of the things that I really like about it so far and some of the things that I find less enjoyable. So, Valheim begins as you are thrown into the map in the clutches of a giant raven who will also be your tutor. The tutorial aspects of the game are pretty well hidden. The bird will appear, the raven will appear from time to time and give you tips. It's not overwhelming. It's really nice. You do feel like you're sort of in your own world playing your own game. And you know, the Hugin turns up from time to time to tell you things you might not have realized. So in terms of tutorials and learnings, the game does that really well. Overall, for price, to start with, its price point is great. It's an early access title. It is around $20 in price, slightly cheaper or more depending on your currency conversion, but it's really affordable, right? Because it's early access, it's really affordable. So I can't fault it on its price. It's great. It's available on Steam right now for about $20. Performance, as I touched on at the start of the video, in my experience, the performance is very good. Now, is it the most graphically intensive game you've ever played? No. In fact, while I was live streaming it earlier today, I on several occasions pointed out the fact that it really does quite seriously give off strong PS1, PS2 vibes in terms of graphics, right? The graphical fidelity of this game is not huge, but it doesn't matter. And this is coming from a graphics snob. Like, I really do enjoy good picture. It's really important to me, but I almost don't even notice. The world is expansive and inviting, and it has these wonderful elements of Norse mythology that pull together into, while it may not technically look the best graphically, into what is a really fantastic world. So overall performance, I can't really fault it. I was streaming it, I was recording it, I've played single player and I've played multiplayer with a couple of people, and it's always performed very well. No real teething issues that you would experience with a lot of early access games. I have to say it's almost as polished as a full release. Not in terms of features necessarily, but just strictly thinking about performance. It's almost as polished as a full release. I imagine that there are improvements that they'll make. There's definitely still room for improvement, but overall performance, it's getting a solid 8 out of 10 from me. This is a well-performing game, despite looking like it came from the PS1, PS2 Spyro era. Now, so I've talked about price, which is good. I've talked about performance, which is good. Now, let's really get into the nitty-gritty gameplay, because this is where, in the review and when you're thinking about whether the game's worth it or not, this is ultimately what will matter more than anything, right? Providing it performs at a base level and it's reasonably affordable, which it is. In my experience, the Raven is a helpful tutor, as I've said, and in general, the The gameplay is really, really fun. Like, I can't overstate it enough. It does everything pretty well. Let me take you through it in a little more detail, though, because I do have a few bugbears. Firstly, base building. I spent quite a bit of time mucking around with the base building. There are some things that are unclear. For example, if you want to sleep in a bed, it really needs to be like in a fully fledged, proper, insulated, closed off building. And if it's not, it won't let you sleep in it because it's too exposed. But it doesn't really make it clear, like, what are the requirements for a bed to not be exposed, for example. Also, another small gripe that I have with the base building is that the sort of like the auto grid for where, let's say you're trying to build a floor and the floor connects to the wall, the auto grid, as in how the wall or the floor snaps to the other item, is difficult to use. It sort of takes a little bit of finessing. You have to be quite precise with your placements, which is not necessarily a bad thing. I'm not even saying this critique because it makes me dislike the game. It's just something to point out that you might find a few little niggly frustrations when you're scrolling through menus or trying to get a wall to snap to a floor and it won't do it, or it's on the wrong angle. But to base building's credit, I have to say it's really quite flexible. It's not this rudimentary, you must build a square box. You know, you can build stuff on angles and you can terraform the world, and overall the base building experience is actually very good. There are just a few finicky things that I think the developers need to iron out, but it in no way detracts from the overall gameplay, right? It detracts a little bit in the moment, but overall it won't detract from it. So I'm pretty happy with the base building. Resource gathering, just like any other game, any other open world survival crafting game, you're going to be out there punching trees, punching stones, building tools, upgrading them, getting better loot, upgrading your gear, your armor, your weapons, all sorts. You know, the gameplay and the resource gathering is really fun. It's pretty simple. Like it is a chill time. Like, it's not particularly strenuous, it's not particularly hard, it's fairly intuitive, but overall, like I say, it's really fun, it's really enjoyable, and I can't stress that enough. In terms of final gameplay elements from this first look, and this is a first look, like I only have around 10 hours in the game, and it is early access, so you know, take these findings as findings that you can use for when you're also first stepping into the game. But yeah, in terms of first look and overall gameplay, really happy with the base building, happy with the combat, with the exception of the bow. I think the developers need to work a bit more on that. It's not very intuitive. And then the final system that's going to really play a huge part of your life when you're not building a base, but when you're actually out gathering resources or exploring the map or fighting bosses, which I will cover next. And that'll be the last thing I'll cover for this video. But the final sort of element to the gameplay that might keep you engrossed in it is that combat, and the bow is pretty average. Like, you sort of draw the bow and there's no zoom, there's no way of telling how far the arrow will go or how far the drop will be or the damage. So if you're really into those specific indicators, you're not going to get them. But again, I have to say, and this is a reoccurring theme, sure, it's simple, sure, it needs some tweaking, it's early access for goodness sake, but it's really fun. The bow is clunky and not fantastic, but it's really fun to use. And that brings me into my final point, which is the bosses and the overall lore of the world, because the two are very heavily related. So there are lots of bosses in this game. I've encountered just a couple, but I'm sure there are many more and will be many more in the future, because it is early access, of course. But these bosses are fantastic. You know, I've seen a giant kraken in the water and a giant tree monster thing from Norse mythology, and basically everything in between. There are really weak mobs that roam the world as well, from animals to ghoul looking things, right the way up to those bosses. I think the life in the world gives it a real depth Not just the bosses and the lore and the runes with the secret messages that are hidden around, or the random procedurally generated towers and forts you might find, which I was lucky enough to find a few. But just overall, the bosses add an incredible amount to the world building. And while the combat may be slightly clunky, sure, you can jump and dive and dodge and what have you, but that doesn't matter, and it doesn't detract too much from the boss fighting experience. And I'm sure in the future they'll iron it out even more. So that has been my quick first look at this Valheim early access game, the open world survival crafting Viking fantasy game for 1 to 10 players. It's available now in early access on Steam, and to summarize what we've discussed, it's coming out at a great price point. Its performance for what it offers graphically and across both single player and multiplayer is really good, especially for an early access game. The performance is really good. It'll run on most systems, thanks to the slightly lower fidelity graphics. He's looking at you, Sony, PS1. But the gameplay, though, which is, once those first two things are ticked off, is the most important thing, is fantastic. The base building, while a little finicky, leaves lots of space for your creative endeavors. The clunky, slightly inaccurate bow and sword play is a little rough around the edges, but really, actually quite enjoyable. And the overall experience, the lore of the world, and the way that it draws you in and either relaxes you in the comfort of chopping some logs or really gets the adrenaline going in a boss fight, is absolutely wonderful. I would highly recommend this game to new players and players interested in the early access genre, and I would give it an 8.5 out of 10. Thanks very much for watching this early access review of Valheim. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and drop a like rating. I'd super appreciate that. Helps the channel, helps me grow, and helps me deliver more content like this. Thanks for joining me for this slightly less formal discussion today, everybody, and I'll see you in the next one.